It's the Underdogs back with you for the best week of the year. I'm Jordan Brenner, joined as always by Peter Keating. And of course, our show is brought to you by DraftKings. DraftKings, the crown
is yours.
And we are super excited today's show to cover the women's NCAA tournament from every angle. And joining us for at least several of those angles from the Dan Le Batard show. You know her, you love her. She's Lucy Rohden. Lucy, welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy they love me.
Oh, who doesn't?
We made that part up.
Except
yeah,
restaurants that mispronounce your name, but you know.
Except for Rick Rohden.
Yes. Although it's spelled differently too, Peter. So you're really just, you're
people spell it wrong all the time too.
They put the H in front of the O, right?
I would say it's spelled wrong most of the time than right.
Yep. I mean, you can change this. You'd have to disgrace the family name, but you could change this.
I'd be okay. The family name disgraced me. Why do we have such a stupid last name? I don't get it. I really don't.
Find the guy who started spelling it that way.
All right. Well, hey, women's tournament. Super exciting. Women's basketball has had a moment the past couple of years. We finally got more eyeballs on the sport. A lot of great teams this year. So let's start at the top. Yeah, we make our bones picking underdogs, and we will later. But Lucy, thoughts on the top seeds? You have a championship favorite at this point?
I do. It's South Carolina, and that's specifically because I believe that Dawn Staley is Kirby smarting everyone. So when the selection show came out, I don't know if we've ever had a tournament selection where everyone's been so mad about being a 1 seed. You're like, oh.
Yeah, we got to unpack that a little bit too, but go on.
It's a little odd. So UCLA was the #1 overall seed. I don't believe that UCLA is the best team in this tournament. I don't think so. I think that UCLA has some pretty glaring weaknesses. So South Carolina, the 2nd overall seed, they are announced #2, and Dawn Staley is not a happy camper. Rightfully so. The way South Carolina played Texas, the way that South Carolina has rebounded from a pretty god-awful UConn loss. Obviously, UConn's a very good team, but South Carolina lost by, I've never seen them lose like that. Like, it was just a complete, just ass kicking. And so South Carolina, Dawn Staley, they're like, we should be the #1 overall seed. This is wrong. This is not fair. I will say UCLA does have a head-to-head win over South Carolina. So
yeah. And let's unpack that, okay? The difference between being the #1 overall seed and the #2 overall seed is essentially negligible. Yes. Would you rather have NC State as your 2 than Duke? Yes. Should South Carolina beat either of those teams handily anyway? Yes. So, what are we getting upset about here?
Well, Jordan, wait. Everybody just wait a second. First of all, there's a big gap between NC State and Duke. I understand why, who cares if you're #1 or #2 overall, but if you're going into it with the knowledge that your opponent is NC State as opposed to Duke or vice versa, that difference, I think, could make a big difference. The other thing is this, Jordan. I think that whatever criteria people want to use, should you respect the champion? Should you reward strength of schedule? Should you reward recent performance? Whatever angle you take from this, and there are a million different angles, South Carolina, since getting smoked by UConn in a game where it's the first time like Lucy said, first time I ever saw Dawn Staley's team seem slow and out of step and out of sync. Since then,
they finished strong.
They have smoked a whole series of top 10. You can make the argument that their past 7 games are the best 7-game stretch by anybody in the entire field this whole year.
Peter, that's and we'll go back to Lucy because she'll have far more intelligent things to say than we do. But real quick, the criteria for selection is not how you've done in your last 7 games. And by the way, we saw it on the men's side with Auburn. So you'd be the first person to call out recency bias. Again,
right. So if you look at
my
data for the
entire
whole
point
season, if you look at for the whole season, how are they not #1 or #2?
My entire point is none of the men's 1 seeds are complaining about where they were ranked in the order because it largely doesn't matter. And again, by the way, South Carolina got easier 4 and 5 seeds than UCLA did. My whole point is if you understand the nature of the bracket, it doesn't matter. Lucy, please back me up.
So I agree with both of you in the sense that I don't think it makes, I know that's not helpful. I know that I don't think it makes that much of a difference. And I think that Dawn Staley believes that as well. I think that this is just Kirby Smart telling the Georgia football players that everybody doubts you, even though you're the #3 team in the country. I think Dawn Staley is like, no one believes in you, South Carolina, #2 overall seed, women's basketball powerhouse, full squad of McDonald's All-Americans. Nobody believes in you. to sort of amp this team up for the tournament. I kind of think she's playing into it, which is smart. It's kind of why Dawn Staley is who Dawn Staley is. Like, she's 10 steps ahead of everyone else. I just think that South Carolina is the better team. I think they're much, much better than UCLA. However, when they played back last year, UCLA got the head-to-head. And so it's hard to be like, okay, we're deciding between these two teams when they have a head-to-head matchup. The only thing that I really took away from it that I thought was interesting, that I don't necessarily think was Dawn Staley blowing smoke, was her being like, okay, yeah, we schedule UConn every year and we lost. Going forward, I don't know if we're going to do that. And that's something that's bad for the sport. You want South Carolina playing UConn. I know that South Carolina has a series coming up next year with USC, like the Battle of the SCs. You want these teams playing in the non-conference. And so that scares me a little bit. And that also kind of reminded me back to college football when Alabama was left out the playoff and they said, well, we're not going to play anybody anymore.
Yeah.
And I was like, South Carolina, don't do that. Dawn, no, don't say that.
Is it the SCs, by the way, in that series, or is it the Cox versus the Trojans? Which is going to be the bigger angle?
The bigger angle? You know, now you've completely distracted me, but let me ask you this.
It's tough to rebound from that.
Do you think that
that's what I do?
So many more words that I will not use. Do you think there's anything to this idea that the game, as manifested in the tournament selection committee, also wants to play up this UCLA USC rivalry, West Coast angle, new teams, new blood, new superstars? There's publicity for this whole, I actually think the team that has the best case, other than South Carolina for being the #1 overall squad here, was UConn. UConn beat South Carolina head to head better than anyone else, worse, I guess, than anyone else has maybe ever. And, our statistical model, which adjusts teams for their margins of victory and the strength of schedule, shows a very close UConn, South Carolina, neck and neck above the rest of the field. I wonder if this is, so first of all, I wonder about UConn. And second of all, I wonder if we're just watching this kind of whole California West Coast rivalry, new team thing kind of get built up a little hype-wise.
I don't think so. I don't think they're like planning this USC UCLA rivalry. I would have to look at the TV numbers to see if they actually kind of stood up. I do think that UCLA and USC are kind of at a disadvantage being on the West Coast, because I don't think that rivalry hits as hard as other ones, because a lot of people are just not going to stay up late to watch that. So I do think there is incentive in having those two teams play, but Dawn Staley super, super mad about the seed she's gotten. USC, I think, also incredibly mad, Southern California. And I think that one was a little more warranted as well, because you beat UCLA twice this season. And both times that USC beat UCLA, they were really convincing. They were much, much better than UCLA was. That's the reason I don't feel very comfortable with UCLA as the #1 overall seed. I think that what we saw against USC, how they just could not do anything against Juju Watkins, was really alarming. And so I think USC is actually in the worst. It's tough that they're both USCs. It makes things difficult.
100%.
It's really tough.
Complaining about UConn as your 2 seed. That's a legit gripe.
That's fair. That's absolutely
I'm okay.
fair.
But let's get into UConn or whoever else. Who do you see giving South Carolina the most trouble? And if South Carolina doesn't win, this team will.
I have UConn and South Carolina in my national championship game. Those are the two teams that I have down to the wire. And I think that if they play again, I do not think that South Carolina will look the way they did the first time around. I have firsthand seen what happens when you piss off Dawn Staley. I saw what happens. My team pissed off Dawn Staley, and then the next time we played was miserable.
That was sounding like you personally might have pissed off Dawn Staley.
No.
What'd you say?
Tell us? She is a lovely woman. I'm a huge fan of hers. However, she did ruin my national championship for me, which was pretty tough. It just feels like it's crazy to me that UConn is a 2 seed. Like, I feel better with UConn over Texas, even UConn over USC at this point, because they are just so, so good. And tournament experience is so important. And you have one of the best players in the country. It's crazy to me that they are a 2 seed, and that's why I think that it'll come down to UConn, USC, South Carolina. That's so tough. That's really going to get me in the national championship game with South Carolina winning.
How many?
Peter and I have actually both picked UConn to win it all independently. It never makes me feel good when we're aligned. It's a very bad sign. But
it makes me feel good when anyone studying something independently agrees with anything I say. So I'm very happy, and Jordan's very unhappy when we get to the same conclusions.
yep.
How many teams do you think have a legit shot
Um,
overall?
I I would say, well, like the women's tournament does tend to follow the same formula every year, where it is the top three seeds have the best chance. So obviously South Carolina, UCLA, I don't feel very comfortable in. I like don't feel very confident in. I don't know what it is about them. I think it's just they're so reliant on Betts, and she's electric and she's amazing, but like step up, somebody else. Like this cannot be a one-person team. And so I don't feel very confident in UCLA. I do think USC is definitely a contender. It just sucks that you have UConn in your region, and that's brutal. Texas as well, and TCU. They have been
Mm-hmm.
so feisty. They are a team that like can move the ball very quickly. They I think that if they get past Notre Dame, which I think they will, Notre Dame is trending in the absolute wrong direction right now. They have looked really bad the last few weeks. They are a team that could make the Final Four because Texas definitely has some errors and they have some
Can we talk
weaknesses.
about Notre Dame for 1 second?
Well, wait,
Because
before we talk about Notre Dame, can we talk about TCU for a second? Because fans of this program
we love
will
TCU.
remember us talking about them, was it 2 years ago?
Yeah,
When they were so
Oh,
decimated
awful.
by injuries.
they had
They were
walk-on
holding
tryouts.
open tryouts.
Yeah,
There was like
And
a girl from
now
the
here they
volleyball
are.
team that played.
yeah, they
Yeah.
had players from other
We,
sports
we
walking on
talked
to
about that on
rescue the
our
team.
show,
Yeah.
and here they are 2 years later with Haley Van Lith and everyone else they brought in, and they're a 2 seed. What an amazing underdog story. Now talk about Notre Dame.
I was going to say that Haley Van Lith as a redemption story. I mean, that's going to be a lifetime movie someday. I mean, that is you
Our
couldn't write
producer
that in
Sarah
advance.
is a big Haley Van Lith fan, so I know she's excited.
I do think it's a little bit funny that last year with Haley Van Lith and LSU, they were like, we're gonna make them play Louisville. We're gonna make them do it. And then Louisville was the only higher seed upset that weekend. So they were like, okay, this year, we'll do it this year. We're gonna make them play Louisville.
You know, I saw Seth Greenberg on a 3 hour long program yesterday on TV, holding his own, doing great, talking to football guys. Every time he brought up something like that, like a suspicious or he would say conspiracy. So now whenever I hear that, yeah, there it is, conspiracy, whether it's true or not, got that matchup coming
The
up.
problem is with the portal. Half the
It's not the
players
same
on the
team at
team
all.
have played elsewhere. It's
Right.
almost
It's
like
just
Right. The only
you're
thing
bound
people
to
who-
play someone you played against,
the only
right?
people who care are the fans.
yeah, she won't be playing like any of her former teammates. It's
Right.
just her former coach. But I think it's something where like I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist, but when Iowa and LSU last year ended up in the same region, I was like, you did that on purpose. And I know they're doing these things on
Conspiracy.
purpose.
Yeah.
They're doing it. I know.
All right, Peter, we got a couple minutes left with Lucy.
With Rick.
That's okay.
With
What
with
the hell? What are
Rhodey.
you talking about?
With Rhodey. Do we you want
I-
to talk about Notre Dame real
I
quick?
want to ask real
I
quick
do.
because Jordan, you argued about not believing in recency bias. I agree with that. However, Notre Dame looks like they're falling apart. 6 weeks ago, you could make a case that they would be a viable national champion. What the hell has happened? I don't get it.
They were the number one team in the country for I think it was like 2 or 3 weeks before everything just hit the brakes. They ran into a tough NC State team. They played really poorly in the ACC tournament. It's crazy. We're like I don't even necessarily know what's wrong. Like watching them, you're just like you're in a funk. Like everything just like doesn't feel right. And I do think that was reflected. Notre Dame was very a few weeks ago favorite for a 1 seed, maybe even the number one overall seed, and to see them drop all the way to a 3 shows me that the selection committee was watching Notre Dame's games, that they are taking in recency bias because they just don't look good. I'm hoping that them losing earlier in the ACC tournament than expected gave them a little time to figure it out because I think Neil Ivy's an amazing coach. I think she's super, super smart and can get this team together. Obviously, they have the talent with Hannah Hidalgo, Olivia Miles. They're a very good team, but it's just off. Like, I wish there was a better explanation. Things just like aren't working, and I don't even know why.
Yeah, it's a weird time of year for a team with a great coach to go into a deep, what's almost a visibly deep funk. It's just weird. They don't look like themselves, and it's a weird thing to say, but I don't know how to quantify it.
Yeah,
Well, you know
it's just
who's
odd.
you know who's not in a deep funk? The three of us, because this killed it. Lucy, thanks for being here. Don't be a stranger. Maybe like College World Series time, we could do some fun stuff, some baseball, some softball. Keep hitting on our favorite schools. What do you think?
Oh, I'd be happy to. I will say that I'm going to tune in after and see for your underdogs if you picked Murray State, and then that's going to change things for me. We'll
Okay.
see.
All right.
Don't do it.
You're
Don't do
anti-Murray?
it.
Everyone's doing it, and I'm an Iowa fan, and I just don't want them to.
There we go.
Lifelong
Got it.
Iowa fan, please stop making us get upset. It hurts
Fair
my
enough.
feelings.
Noted. We can't actually manifest upsets, though, right? You're safe.
No, I'm mentally ill. No, nothing's safe.
All
Nothing's
right.
safe. Everyone pick Iowa.
Well, on that note, thank you, Lucy Rohden. Super
It's okay,
excited to have
it's
had you, and we will be back right after this. We're back, and it's time for our Under of the Week, brought to you by DraftKings. DraftKings, if you haven't heard, the crown is yours. Peter, this is something I really like to do early in the tournament, and it's betting first half unders.
Oh, good Lord. You're bringing your theory to the masses. Here we go.
In early games. I think teams come out tight early in the tournament. I think it's really hard sometimes to play at noon with your body clock, and I think you see that the biggest issue, teams are amped up, teams are ready to get out and attack each other, and the biggest issue you see is the shooting is off early. So the first game of the tournament, Thursday, little afternoon, is Creighton and Louisville. Both are good offensive teams.
Say they can both score.
They can both score. And the game total is, for the full game, is 144.5. You'll see that, look, the under's already adjusted, right? Second, full game totals are higher because at the end of games, you're fouling a lot and scores get padded, right? The first half under is 67.5, which might seem low, but you know what? I'm still going under that. I think this is going to be one of those games where you look up 12 minutes in and it's like 7-4. And then teams will figure it out, get rolling. But I've seen it too many times where teams in those early games start slowly and you've got a gold win with the first half under. So let's take it to the first game of the tournament. Creighton, Louisville, first half under 67.5 combined points.
Low.
Low. And I'm going to keep hammering other games with that. And then we'll sit back and look at how I did.
I listen, there's so many teams that roll out of bed and look like they're not ready to play. You flip on those early games and the scores are off and low. Underdogs seem amped, but a lot of times these scores go low.
Yep. All right. Well, that's on the men's side. Let's get back to the women. And now it's time for our bread and butter, Peter. It's underdog time. So we talked about championship contenders with Lucy. Let's talk about teams that can break some brackets in the women's tournament, with the caveat that in general, the women's tournament has never been about the kind of chaos you see on the men's side. But every year, it's starting to get a little bit deeper, a little bit better chances for underdogs to do something. Who is our statistical model?
Well, wait. You're right about that, and I want to point out something that I just kind of figured out.
Can you say that again real quick?
You were right about the talent getting broader and the quality of the teams getting deeper. But think about this, Jordan. This is interesting. It just occurred to me recently because we're looking at the upset potential this year. If there are now 30 good teams, right, and 10 national championship contenders instead of 1 or 2 contenders and 8 good teams, that's actually terrible for tournament underdogs, because if you're the 40th to 60th best team in the country, you're now facing a Utah or an Iowa or an Oklahoma or a Minnesota or a Texas who are buzzsaws. So for this temporary period that we're in right now, yes, parity is coming, but it hasn't gotten down to the point of the underdogs yet. So they're actually having a tougher time because the 2, 3, 4 seeds are so good. So I just want to say that up front, because our upset estimates show very few teams with a chance to pull out right upsets.
Well, I do think we have a couple second round games that we like. But Peter, if there's a double digit seed, 1 or 2 that you think could make some noise in the first round, who pops to mind?
Jordan, I want to bring up a crazy pick that's going to seem crazy to a lot of people, but Montana State leads the entire country in steal percentage. And and from our model, we know the one thing that you cannot discount is the possibility that an underdog who is turnover obsessed will drive a giant that is used to having its way, used to imposing its will on a game, crazy. Think Abilene Christian or Stephen F. Austin or those crazy teams on the men's side. Montana State is led by a freshman point guard who's just in the past this calendar year, as opposed to this season, gotten some playing time, and they force turnovers at an incredible rate, like 25% of opponent possessions a game. And so I think they're in the Birmingham 2. Is that correct? Are they the 13 seed? They won the conference tournament on the last second crazy shot. I want you to keep them in mind. The percentage chance is maybe 20, 25% that they'll pull this off. But that's a kind of a cool, crazy pick.
Yep. Anybody else who rises to the level of Montana State as a double-digit seed, or are they on an island here?
Usually I'd like to say Florida Gulf Coast because they bomb threes away like nobody else, but their coach is gone. They're not really that extreme in that anymore. So they kind of have a chance, but they got a 14 seed. That's another thing. They got a really bad matchup. It's worth mentioning George Mason. They're a good team that does everything that's necessary for an underdog to build possessions. They hit the offensive boards. They're really good when they shoot threes. They protect the ball. They force turnovers. They have a tough matchup, but all these teams have tough matchups.
We should also say that George Mason is sort of the patron saint of giant killing, as their men's team Final Four run was basically what launched this series into its existence. So
yeah, and a tiebreaker, it's always worth picking George Mason.
Right. Second round, I have my eye on a couple games, Peter. First up, if Michigan State survives Harvard in a 7-10 game, no easy feat by any means, but Michigan State would play NC State, who we look at as an extremely vulnerable 2 seed. Their overall strength of teams, which our model measures on net rating per 100 possessions, there's only like a 1-point difference between the two teams. So you would expect more between a 2 and a 7 seed, but they're almost even, at least in terms of ability, according to our model.
That's right. Look. Even if Harvard survives that game, they've had a great season. They'd have a solid shot against NC State. Whoever's coming out of that game, NC State's vulnerable.
Right. But Michigan State also, you mentioned turnovers. They force turnovers on 25% of possession. So you have that 1-point gap, very narrow, and then they do things to narrow it even more. Very, very cool option. Any other second round games that you like?
Well, West Virginia plays extraordinarily well as an underdog, and if they get by,
that would be their 6 seeds. They play Washington, and if they were to win, they would get Carolina as a 3 seed.
Then they'd get Carolina.
North Carolina, by the way.
North Carolina, yeah.
And that's even more pronounced, Peter, than what we were saying about NC State, Michigan State. Our model ranks West Virginia as a better team than Carolina by almost 6 points.
Right. So if they get there, I mean, some of these underseedings make for fantastic second-round matchups. I'll also just bring up Vanderbilt because they've been an underdog.
Wait. You didn't say the most interesting, cool, and awesome thing about West Virginia. They lead the nation in forcing turnovers.
They lead the nation in forcing turnovers. I thought for a second you were going to say that they covered against Clayton Clark in Iowa last year. As an underdog, they forced a bunch of turnovers in that game. That's where you might have seen their constant pressure and action. Press Virginia has come to the women's side.
That's right. And we did like that as a potential upset last year, as crazy as it may have sounded at the time. Okay, so we're looks like we're picking on ACC teams in the second round. Anything else catch your eye?
Well, I just want to mention Vanderbilt. If they get to the second round, they'd match up against Duke, which would be a game for the ages because Vanderbilt does an incredible job forcing turnovers, steals. They seize the ball. I mean, it's their style of play. It's relentless pressure. And Duke's really good, but that would be a really fun matchup.
Well, Duke, it's funny. Duke last year pulled off a big upset against Ohio State, right?
Yes.
Wasn't it in a 2-7 game?
It was. They were one of the very few. There were only like 2 or 3 upsets in the entire bracket last year, and that was a big one.
Right. So now they could find themselves on the other side of this. That's just an interesting turn of events for sure.
It's a tough year. I loved Fairfield all year. I was watching Fairfield's women's basketball games because their coach went out of her way to say, no 13s. We want a 12 seed so that we don't have to play at an opponent's home court. And they got it. They won 30 games. They do everything. They shoot a bunch of threes. They're like the new Florida Gulf Coast. And then they got Kansas State as a first round matchup, and that's just really difficult. So, you don't just need to play these styles. You need to then survive your conference tournament. Then you need to get a decent seed, and then you need to get a vulnerable opponent. And that's that's a rough. Is that a trifecta? What is that to pull off?
I also think we should mention Sweet 16. I keep looking at Kansas State if they're the 5 seed in Spokane. If they get past Kentucky, a Kansas State USC game could be dangerous.
Kansas State may have gone through its roughest patch of the year and now may be ready to peak at the right time. I think they were like a top 10 team for most of the season. Then they lost their best player, the woman who gives them size and presence in the middle of Yuka Lee, for weeks, and they did not look like themselves. They got a bunch of guards forcing turnovers, playing around her, shooting threes. If they get everybody on the court healthy at the same time, they're a really dangerous team.
Right. Well, Peter, I can't believe the tournaments are finally here. We spend literally all year preparing for these days. And we'll be back next week to break down everything that happened and look ahead to the next phase of the tournament.